What if the most powerful woman in the ancient world is waiting for you tonight? Not in a palace of gold, but in the quiet space between waking and sleep. Welcome to Drift to Sleep. I'm so glad you're here, wherever this night finds you. Whether the rain is tapping against your window, the city lights are glowing beyond your curtains, or the world outside is completely still. You've chosen to spend this time drifting into history with me. Before we begin, I'd love to know something simple and beautiful. Let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Tell me your country, your city, or just the direction of the wind outside your door. I always love seeing how far these stories travel in the quiet hours of the night. And if this is your first time here, consider subscribing. Drift to Sleep is a place for slow, immersive storytelling, long-form journeys through history designed to calm your mind, soften your thoughts, and guide you gently into rest. No rush, no noise, just stories unfolding at the pace of breath. Tonight, we travel back more than 2,000 years to candlelit chambers in Alexandria, to the scent of the Nile at dusk, to a queen whose name still echoes across centuries. Tonight's story is Cleopatra. So lower the lights, settle into your pillow, and let the past rise slowly around you. The night lay heavy over Alexandria, and the sea whispered against the marble edges of the great harbour. Torches burned along the Heptastadion causeway, their flames bending softly in the Mediterranean wind. Above them, the Pharos lighthouse cast its steady glow across the dark water, as it had for generations, guiding ships toward the richest city of the Eastern world. Within the palace quarter, behind colonnades and carved cedar doors, Cleopatra was born into a dynasty already trembling. She entered the world in 69 BCE, a daughter of the house of Ptolemy. The Ptolemies had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, yet they were not Egyptian in blood. They were Macedonian Greeks, descendants of Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander the Great's generals. They spoke Greek in their court, kept Greek customs, and governed from Alexandria rather than from the ancient capitals along the Nile. But Cleopatra would be different. She would learn the Egyptian tongue. She would present herself not merely as a queen of foreign descent, but as Pharaoh. Her father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, ruled uneasily. Rome loomed over Egypt like a patient creditor. The once mighty kingdom depended on Roman favor to maintain its throne. Debts mounted. Bribes were paid. Political enemies whispered. When Cleopatra was still a child, her father was driven from Egypt by rebellion. She watched, perhaps from the palace windows, as uncertainty swallowed the court. For 3 years he lived in Rome, pleading for restoration. Cleopatra remained in Alexandria, absorbing the lesson that power was fragile and that Rome decided the fate of kings. When Ptolemy XII returned with Roman backing, he brought soldiers and executions. Order was restored, but at a cost. Cleopatra grew into adolescence, in a court shaped by intrigue, betrayal, and dependence on foreign strength. She was educated in philosophy, rhetoric, mathematics, and astronomy. Unlike many of her ancestors, she learned Egyptian alongside Greek, and likely spoke several other languages of the Eastern Mediterranean. Ancient sources would later exaggerate her beauty, but they were more consistent in praising her voice, her intellect, and her presence. Cleopatra understood that influence could be crafted through language and performance. In 51 BCE, her father died. Cleopatra was 18. By tradition of the Ptolemaic line, she co-ruled with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, whom she married according to dynastic custom. The marriage was political and hollow. Real power would depend not on ceremony, but on control of advisors and armies. At first, Cleopatra's name appeared alone on official documents, suggesting she attempted to rule independently. But factions formed around the boy king. Courtiers resented her authority. The regent Pothinus and the general Achillas maneuvered carefully. Within a few years, Cleopatra was forced from Alexandria. She did not surrender. She withdrew eastward, gathering loyal supporters in Syria, raising an army in the desert heat. While she prepared her return, the Roman world convulsed. Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, once allies in Rome's first triumvirate, turned against one another. Civil war spread across the Mediterranean. Pompey, defeated at Pharsalus in 48 BCE, fled to Egypt seeking refuge. He believed Egypt owed him loyalty. He had once supported Ptolemy XII. Instead, Ptolemy XIII's advisors calculated differently. Seeking Caesar's favor, they had Pompey murdered upon arrival and presented his severed head to Caesar when he landed in Alexandria. The gesture misjudged the Roman. Caesar, though ruthless, was appalled by the killing of a Roman consul. He entered Alexandria with limited forces and found himself entangled in Egypt's dynastic conflict. Cleopatra understood immediately that Rome's struggle and her own were now intertwined. Legend tells that she had herself smuggled into the palace, wrapped in a rug or bedding sack, to meet Caesar in secret. Whether embroidered by later storytellers or not, the essence remains. Cleopatra secured a private audience. She presented not desperation, but alliance. She offered intelligence, wealth, and loyalty. Caesar, nearly 30 years her senior, recognized both her political value and her formidable mind. War erupted in Alexandria. The city burned in places during the fighting, and parts of the Great Library may have suffered damage. Caesar's forces, though outnumbered, held strategic positions. Reinforcements eventually arrived. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile during the chaos of battle. Cleopatra emerged victorious. She was restored to the throne, now co-ruling with another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. Yet the balance of power had shifted permanently. Caesar lingered in Egypt. Cleopatra bore him a son in 47 BCE. Ptolemy XV, Philopator Philometor Caesar, known as Caesarion. Whether Caesar fully acknowledged the boy publicly remains debated, but Cleopatra certainly presented him as Caesar's heir. In 46 BCE, Cleopatra traveled to Rome. She resided in a villa across the Tiber as Caesar consolidated authority. Romans whispered about the foreign queen. Her presence unsettled them. Statues of her were placed in the temple of Venus Genetrix. To some, she was an exotic ally. To others, a symbol of Caesar's ambition to crown himself king. In 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March. Cleopatra was still in Rome. The knives that struck him shattered her political foundation. She departed swiftly for Egypt. Shortly thereafter, Ptolemy XIV died, likely poisoned. Cleopatra elevated Caesarion as co-ruler. She would not allow Egypt to drift leaderless. Rome fractured again into civil war. Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate. Enemies were purged, territories divided. Antony took responsibility for Rome's eastern provinces. In 41 BCE, He summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus in Cilicia to answer accusations that she had supported his enemies. Cleopatra sailed north on a barge adorned with gold and purple sails, presenting herself as Aphrodite incarnate. The display was deliberate theatre. Antony, seasoned soldier though he was, responded not only to spectacle, but to strategic advantage. Egypt's wealth could fund campaigns against Parthia. Cleopatra offered partnership, and perhaps more. Their alliance became personal and political. Cleopatra bore Antony 3 children, the twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selina, and later Ptolemy Philadelphus. Together, they envisioned a reordering of the Eastern Mediterranean. In the donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE, Antony distributed territories to Cleopatra and their children, proclaiming Caesarion the true heir of Julius Caesar. In Rome, Octavian watched carefully. He framed Antony not as a rival Roman, but as a man corrupted by an Eastern queen. Propaganda painted Cleopatra as a sorceress, a seductress bent on conquering Rome. Antony's will, read aloud in the Senate, allegedly requested burial beside Cleopatra in Alexandria. Roman opinion hardened. War became inevitable. In 31 BCE, their forces met Octavian's fleet at the Battle of Actium off the coast of Greece. The naval engagement stretched under a hot September sun. Cleopatra commanded part of the fleet. At a critical moment, her ships withdrew. Whether planned retreat or strategic miscalculation, Antony followed. The battle was lost. They returned to Egypt, their position weakened but not yet destroyed. Octavian advanced methodically. Allies defected, supplies dwindled. In 30 BCE, Roman forces entered Alexandria. Believing Cleopatra dead from false reports, Antony fell upon his sword. Mortally wounded, he was carried to her mausoleum where she had barricaded herself. He died in her arms. Cleopatra faced a choice shaped by centuries of monarchy and weeks of siege. Octavian intended to parade her through Rome in chains. She negotiated, perhaps seeking to secure her children's futures. But Caesarion was captured and executed. The dynasty's hope ended with him. On August 12th, 30 BCE, Cleopatra died. Ancient writers claim she allowed an asp to bite her, though the exact method remains uncertain. What endures is the image. The last pharaoh of Egypt choosing death over humiliation. She was 39 years old. With her passing, Egypt became a Roman province. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, emerged unchallenged master of the Roman world. Yet Cleopatra's story did not dissolve into dust. Roman poets cast her as villainous or tragic lover. Later centuries reshaped her again and again. But beneath legend lies the record of a ruler who navigated the violent currents of a collapsing Hellenistic age with intelligence, education, and audacity. She had ruled for over 2 decades in a world dominated by Rome. She spoke as pharaoh to her people and as strategist to generals. She bore children meant to anchor a new political order. She gambled on alliances that might preserve independence. In the end, she lost to the machinery of Roman consolidation, but she did not vanish quietly. Outside the palace walls of Alexandria, the sea continued its steady breathing. The lighthouse still burned, the Nile still rose and fell. Empires shifted, but Egypt endured. And somewhere between history and memory, Cleopatra remained, no longer merely queen, nor only lover of Romans, but the final sovereign of an ancient line, standing at the edge of one world as another began. The Nile moved as it always had, slow and indifferent beneath the pale wash of a morning light, as though it had never known the names of kings. Yet along its banks, in temples carved with falcons and sun discs, in fields that inhaled its yearly flood, Egypt felt the shift long before Rome formally declared it. Cleopatra was gone. The palace doors stood open to foreign command. The dynasty that had begun with one of Alexander's generals ended with a queen who refused to kneel. Octavian entered Alexandria not as a destroyer, but as a careful inheritor. He understood spectacle. He had no wish to burn the city that fed Rome's grain supply and dazzled the Mediterranean with its learning and trade. The harbours still teemed with merchant vessels. The Pharos lighthouse still cut a path through the night. The Mausion still housed scholars who traced geometry in dust and charted the heavens with bronze instruments. Egypt would not be erased. It would be absorbed. Cleopatra's body was buried, according to ancient sources beside Mark Antony. Octavian allowed it. Even in victory, there were gestures to be made. But Caesarion, her son, the living symbol of a rival lineage to Julius Caesar, could not be spared. He was captured while attempting to flee south. The boy was 17. His death closed a door that Cleopatra had tried desperately to hold open. Rome would tolerate no alternative heirs. Her other children, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, were taken to Rome. They would walk in Octavian's triumph, displayed in golden chains that were light enough not to bruise, heavy enough to signify conquest. Cleopatra Selene would survive into adulthood and marry Juba II of Mauritania, carrying a thread of her mother's bloodline westward. But Egypt itself would never again be ruled by a pharaoh. Octavian reorganized the land with deliberate precision. Egypt became his personal province, governed not by a senator, but by a prefect loyal directly to him. No Roman senator could enter Egypt without permission. The grain shipments that fed Rome's swelling population were too vital to risk political gains. In this decision lay a quiet acknowledgement of Cleopatra's former power. Egypt had always been more than territory. It was leverage. In Rome, Cleopatra's image hardened into caricature. Poets shaped her into temptation embodied, a foreign enchantress who bewitched noble Romans and threatened the moral spine of the Republic. Horace wrote of a mad queen plotting ruin. Virgil hinted at her in epic verse, framed within the cosmic destiny of Augustus. It was politically convenient to reduce her to seduction and excess. A formidable strategist was easier to dismiss as a lover. Yet beyond Rome's narrative, memory took different forms. In Egypt, she remained linked with Isis, the Divine Mother, the embodiment of continuity and resurrection. Reliefs in temples carved during her reign did not vanish overnight. In Dendera, she was depicted offering to the gods in traditional pharaonic style, her profile carved in stone like rulers who had lived 2,000 years before her. To Egyptian eyes, she had not been a foreign temptress. She had been Pharaoh. Time began its slow transformation of her story. Greek historians recorded fragments. Roman chroniclers added judgment. Centuries later, Plutarch would write of her intelligence and her voice, noting that her beauty alone was not what bound men to her, but her conversation, her wit, her cultivated presence. His account, composed more than a century after her death, would shape much of what later generations believed. Empires rose and folded over one another. Rome shifted from republic to empire. the Colosseum rose. Legions marched north into Britannia and east into Mesopotamia. Alexandria remained a jewel of learning, though fires and conflict would scar it in later centuries. The Great Library, whether diminished during Caesar's campaign or gradually eroded over time, became legend, a symbol of lost knowledge, sometimes unfairly tied to Cleopatra's era. As Christianity spread across the Roman world, Egypt transformed again. Temples closed, statues were broken or buried, hieroglyphs fell silent. Cleopatra's name, once inscribed in cartouches alongside gods, became an echo in foreign manuscripts. The language she had proudly learned faded from common speech. For over a millennium, the script of ancient Egypt would be unreadable. Its symbols, decorative mysteries carved into stone, and yet the fascination endured. In the medieval Islamic world, scholars wrote of ancient Egypt with a mixture of curiosity and myth. The pyramids inspired speculation. Alexandria's ruins hinted at vanished brilliance. Cleopatra drifted through these accounts as a figure both historical and legendary, sometimes portrayed as wise, sometimes as dangerous, always compelling. During the Renaissance in Europe, classical texts resurfaced with renewed intensity. Artists and playwrights rediscovered Plutarch's writings. Cleopatra re-emerged upon the cultural stage, no longer merely a defeated queen, but a tragic heroine. In the early 17th century, William Shakespeare would write Antony and Cleopatra, presenting her as complex, mercurial, fiercely alive. On his stage, she was neither pure villain nor simple victim. She was theatrical, intelligent, contradictory, a woman aware of her own myth, even as she lived it. Painters followed. Cleopatra dissolved pearls in vinegar at lavish banquets. Cleopatra reclined beside Antony beneath crimson drapery. Cleopatra pressed an asp to her breast, pale and luminous in death. Each century reshaped her face according to its own ideals of beauty. In some canvases she was fair-skinned and European. In others, darker, adorned in imagined Egyptian splendor. Historical accuracy yielded often to fantasy. The queen became a mirror. The 19th century, with its colonial gaze turned toward the east, romanticized her further. Archaeology stirred new interest in ancient Egypt. When Napoleon's campaign reached the Nile in 1798, scholars accompanied soldiers, sketching temples and copying inscriptions. The Rosetta Stone unlocked hieroglyphs in 1822, allowing modern readers to hear ancient voices again. Though Cleopatra's era was far removed from pyramid builders, renewed fascination with Egypt inevitably revived interest in its last pharaoh. By the 20th century, cinema embraced her fully. Silent films draped actresses in kohl and gold. In 1963, Elizabeth Taylor portrayed Cleopatra in a production so lavish it nearly bankrupted a studio. The spectacle fixed an image in popular imagination: jeweled headdresses, dramatic eyeliner, intoxicating glamour. The historical ruler blurred beneath Hollywood light, but beneath performance and poetry, historians continued their quieter work. Coins bearing her profile offered tangible evidence: a strong nose, a determined chin. Inscriptions recorded decrees issued in her name. Papyri detailed taxation and administration under her authority. These fragments revealed a ruler engaged in governance, fluent in diplomacy, navigating famine relief and economic reform as carefully as she navigated romance. Modern scholarship has increasingly emphasized her political acumen. Cleopatra inherited a kingdom weakened by debt and internal strife. She stabilized currency. She engaged personally in negotiations. She aligned with Rome, not out of infatuation alone, but calculation. Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were not merely lovers. They were instruments in a strategy to secure Egypt's autonomy within an expanding Roman orbit. Her defeat at Actium, long attributed to reckless passion, appears instead as the culmination of structural realities. Rome's resources dwarfed Egypt's. Octavian commanded loyalty through disciplined propaganda and military consolidation. Cleopatra gambled on Antony because he offered the best chance at Eastern equilibrium. When he fell, the balance collapsed. Still, it is her final act that lingers most vividly. The image of the asp, whether literal or symbolic, conveys choice. Ancient rulers often faced humiliation and defeat. Cleopatra refused to be paraded as spoils. In this refusal, she asserted the only sovereignty left to her. Centuries pass differently for different names. Some erode into footnotes, others crystallize. Cleopatra's endured because she stood at a hinge of history. She lived at the moment the Hellenistic world yielded to Rome. She bridged cultures, Macedonian Greek by blood, Egyptian by presentation, Roman by alliance. She understood theatre, language, and perception in ways that feel strikingly modern. If one listens carefully, beyond the dramatizations and distortions, there remains the quieter truth of a woman born into instability who mastered the tools available to her. She was educated in a court that prized philosophy. She observed her father's exile and learned the cost of weakness. She ruled in her own name when tradition might have silenced her. She negotiated with the most powerful men of her age as an equal. The Nile continues its patient course. Alexandria's ancient shoreline now lies partly beneath the sea, where divers have found statues and columns resting in green silence. Perhaps somewhere beneath those waters lie further traces of her world. Fragments of palace walls, coins dropped in corridors, inscriptions weathered by salt. History rarely grants closure. It leaves impressions, scattered like shards. Cleopatra's life is one such mosaic. To some, she is seduction. To others, sovereignty. To many, tragedy. But within the long arc of time, she remains what she always was. The final sovereign of a dynasty that began in the wake of Alexander's conquests and ended in the shadow of Rome's empire. Night settles again over the Mediterranean. The lighthouse that once guided her ships is gone, toppled by earthquakes long ago. Yet the idea of it persists, a column of light cutting through darkness. Cleopatra's story is something like that beam. Across 2,000 years, through propaganda and poetry, through scholarship and spectacle, it continues to shine, inviting each generation to look again and decide who she truly was. And as the centuries fold softly over her name, the Queen of the Nile drifts not into silence but into legend, suspended between history and dream, where she has remained ever since. Long before the Roman banners appeared on the horizon of Alexandria, before alliances were forged in candlelit chambers and broken upon distant seas, there was a child walking beneath painted ceilings, listening. The palace of the Ptolemies did not resemble the temples of Thebes or the mud brick estates along the Nile. It was a Greek court planted in Egyptian soil, a world of colonnades and mosaics overlooking the Mediterranean, where philosophers debated in shaded courtyards and emissaries from distant kingdoms waited in marble halls. Cleopatra was born into this layered inheritance in 69 BCE, when Egypt was both ancient and precarious. Her earliest years unfolded within a dynasty that had already begun to decay. The Ptolemies had ruled since the death of Alexander the Great, nearly 3 centuries earlier. They carried Macedonian blood and Greek language, yet wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. They married brother to sister to preserve lineage. They named their sons Ptolemy and their daughters Cleopatra in repeating cycles, as if continuity itself could prevent collapse. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, ruled more as a client than a sovereign. Rome's shadow stretched long across the Mediterranean, and Egypt's wealth, especially its grain, made it valuable. Auletes secured Roman favor through heavy payments and political submission. Taxes burdened the land. Discontent simmered in Alexandria, where Greek elites and native Egyptians often lived in uneasy tension. As a child, Cleopatra would have heard arguments behind closed doors. She would have sensed the brittleness of ceremony. When she was around 11, rebellion erupted. Her father fled Egypt for Rome, seeking restoration through Roman intervention. In his absence, her older sister Berenice IV claimed the throne. For nearly 3 years, Cleopatra lived in a kingdom uncertain of its ruler. This exile of her father left an imprint. It revealed how swiftly power could dissolve. It demonstrated that Rome, not tradition, determined legitimacy. When Auletes returned in 55 BCE, escorted by Roman troops under Aulus Gabinius, his restoration came with bloodshed. Berenice was executed. Order was imposed. Cleopatra, still young, observed the cost of survival. Education in the Ptolemaic court was rigorous. Cleopatra studied rhetoric, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and statecraft. Alexandria housed the remnants of the great intellectual tradition centered around the library and the Mauseon. Though diminished from its earliest glory, the culture of scholarship endured. Cleopatra absorbed it. Ancient writers later remarked upon her intellect more consistently than her appearance. She was said to speak several languages: Greek, Egyptian, possibly Aramaic, and others, without reliance on interpreters. This alone distinguished her from many of her ancestors, who had ruled Egypt without ever mastering its native tongue. To speak Egyptian was to bridge a divide that had lasted generations. It allowed her to present herself not merely as a foreign monarch, but as pharaoh in the sacred tradition of Isis and Osiris. In temple reliefs, she appeared in full pharaonic regalia, offering to the gods as a legitimate ruler of the 2 lands. This was not decorative. It was strategic integration. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra was 18. According to his will, she and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII were to co-rule. The marriage that followed was ceremonial, dictated by dynastic custom rather than affection. Cleopatra moved quickly to consolidate authority. Early decrees bear her name prominently. Coins were minted with her image. She likely sought to rule independently, minimizing the influence of court advisors who surrounded her younger brother. Resistance formed swiftly. Pothinus, the eunuch regent of Ptolemy XIII, along with the general Achilles and the rhetorician Theodotus, maneuvered to sideline her. By 49 BCE, tensions erupted into open conflict. Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria, retreating eastward towards Syria. Exile again. But this time she did not wait passively. In the eastern territories she gathered support. Mercenaries were hired. Alliances were tested. She assembled an army with the intention of reclaiming her throne. It was during this precarious moment that the Roman Civil War reached Egyptian shores. Julius Caesar pursued Pompey across the Mediterranean after decisive victory at Pharsalus in 48 BCE. Pompey fled to Egypt believing past favors would guarantee sanctuary. Instead, Ptolemy XIII's advisors calculated that eliminating Pompey would curry favor with Caesar. They assassinated him upon arrival and presented his severed head as tribute. The decision misfired. Caesar was appalled by the murder of a Roman consul. He entered Alexandria not as a grateful ally, but as an arbitrator. Egypt's internal dispute now lay before him. Cleopatra recognized opportunity within crisis. Ancient accounts describe her dramatic entrance into Caesar's presence. Smuggled into the palace, wrapped in fabric to bypass her enemies. Whether embroidered in retelling or not, the meeting altered the trajectory of her reign. She did not plead as a dispossessed girl. She argued as a sovereign. She offered political alignment, financial resources, and stability. Caesar, assessing both her intelligence and Egypt's strategic value, supported her claim. War ignited within Alexandria. Caesar's forces, though limited, held the palace district and key harbors. Fighting raged through streets and along the waterfront. Fire consumed warehouses. Parts of the Great Library may have suffered damage during these clashes, though the extent remains debated among historians. Ptolemy XIII's forces initially held advantage, but reinforcements from Asia Minor arrived for Caesar. The conflict culminated near the Nile in early 47 BCE. Ptolemy XIII drowned while attempting escape after defeat. Cleopatra was restored as queen. A younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, was named co-ruler, but real authority rested with her. Caesar remained in Egypt for months, navigating both politics and personal attachment. In June of 47 BCE, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Ptolemy XV, Philopator Philometor Caesar, known to history as Caesarion. The child embodied ambition. If recognized as Julius Caesar's heir, he could anchor Egypt's future independence. Cleopatra understood symbolism. She presented herself as Isis with her divine child, Horus, echoing religious iconography that resonated deeply within Egypt. In 46 BCE, Cleopatra traveled to Rome. She resided there as Caesar consolidated power following his victory in civil war. Her presence stirred fascination and unease. Rome had little tolerance for monarchy, yet Caesar's authority increasingly resembled kingship. Cleopatra's proximity fed suspicion when Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, stabbed in the Senate by conspirators claiming to defend the Republic. Cleopatra's position became perilous. She returned swiftly to Egypt. Shortly thereafter, Ptolemy XIV died, likely removed to secure Caesarian's sole co-rule beside her. The Roman world fractured again. Out of chaos emerged the second triumvirate: Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. Territories were divided. Antony assumed command of Rome's eastern provinces. In 41 BCE, he summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus to answer accusations that she had aided his enemies. Cleopatra prepared carefully. Her arrival was theatrical. Sails of purple cloth, attendants dressed as nymphs, herself adorned as Aphrodite. The spectacle was deliberate diplomacy. Antony, seasoned and pragmatic, saw more than pageantry. Egypt's treasury could fund campaigns against Parthia. Cleopatra offered wealth and strategic partnership. Their alliance deepened into intimacy. In Alexandria, they formed a court that blended Roman ambition with Hellenistic grandeur. Cleopatra bore Antony twins in 40 BCE, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Later came Ptolemy Philadelphus. Together they envisioned a restructured Eastern realm that might counterbalance Rome's consolidation under Octavian. But Rome was watching. Octavian crafted a narrative that cast Antony as ensnared by an Eastern queen, betraying Roman virtue. Propaganda circulated when Antony's will was seized and read publicly in Rome, allegedly expressing wishes to be buried in Alexandria and granting territories to Cleopatra's children. Outrage spread. The stage was set for final confrontation. In 31 BCE, their fleets met at Actium along the western coast of Greece. The battle unfolded slowly beneath a relentless sun. Octavian's Admiral Agrippa executed superior naval strategy, cutting supply lines and limiting maneuverability. Cleopatra commanded a contingent of ships positioned behind Antony's main force. At a critical juncture, Cleopatra's fleet sailed through a gap and headed south. Whether pre-arranged retreat or moment of strategic necessity, Antony followed. The remaining forces faltered. Actium marked the turning point. They returned to Egypt diminished but not yet defeated. For a year they attempted recovery, but alliances shifted. Octavian advanced steadily. In 30 BCE, Roman forces reached Alexandria. Facing inevitable defeat, Antony received false news that Cleopatra had taken her life. In despair, he fell upon his sword. Mortally wounded, he was brought to her mausoleum, where he died in her arms. Cleopatra, now alone against Rome's tide, attempted negotiation. She sought preservation for her children. Octavian refused recognition of Caesarion. On August 12th, 30 BCE, Cleopatra ended her life. The precise method remains uncertain, poison administered by asp or concealed instrument. What remains certain is intent. She chose death over humiliation. With her passing, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Egypt became Rome's province. Octavian would soon take the title Augustus, inaugurating the Roman Empire. Yet Cleopatra's life resists simplification. She was neither mere seductress nor naive dreamer. She was a ruler shaped by instability, educated in philosophy, fluent in languages, adept in theatre and diplomacy. She navigated a world dominated by Roman power, with calculated alliances and bold gambles. Her story marks the closing chapter of the Hellenistic Age. With her death, the era born from Alexander's conquests yielded fully to Rome's dominion. Still, in the quiet imagination of centuries, she remains, not solely as lover of powerful men, but as sovereign who stood at the fault line of empires and refused to vanish quietly into captivity. And so, her name endures, carried like the Nile's current through time, resurfacing whenever history pauses to remember the woman who was, at once, queen, strategist, mother, and the last pharaoh of Egypt. After Cleopatra's death, silence did not fall all at once. It unfolded gradually, like the lowering of a great curtain over a stage that had known centuries of performance. Alexandria did not crumble in a single day. Its markets reopened. Its ships continued to move across the Mediterranean. Priests still rose at dawn to tend temple rituals. Yet something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since the age of Alexander, Egypt no longer answered to a Hellenistic monarch. It answered to Rome. Octavian moved carefully. He did not plunder Egypt recklessly, nor did he allow it the dignity of partial autonomy. He understood what the land represented. Egypt was grain, and grain was power. Rome's swelling population depended on steady shipments from the Nile Valley. Control of Egypt meant control of bread. And control of bread meant control of loyalty. Instead of appointing a senator to govern the province, Octavian installed a prefect of equestrian rank, directly responsible to him. This was unprecedented. Senators, powerful and ambitious, were forbidden from entering Egypt without imperial permission. The province became the emperor's personal domain, a guarded jewel whose wealth would sustain Rome's transformation from republic to empire. Cleopatra's surviving children were carried to Rome. During Octavian's triumph in 29 BCE, they were displayed before the crowds, walking in symbolic captivity. Cleopatra Selene, dressed as the moon whose name she bore, drew particular attention. The public spectacle was deliberate. It demonstrated that Rome had subdued not merely a rival army, but an entire royal house. Yet Rome's treatment of Cleopatra herself was more restrained. Her body was not dragged in chains through the streets. Octavian allowed her burial, likely beside Mark Antony. This restraint was not compassion, it was calculation. The image of her noble suicide served his narrative better than a broken queen in shackles. She became proof that resistance to Rome ended inevitably, even if wrapped in dignity. In Egypt, the temples continued to bear her likeness for some time. Carvings do not vanish easily. In Dendera, reliefs show Cleopatra and Caesarion presenting offerings to the goddess Hathor. The stone preserves her profile, the crown, the uraeus serpent, the formal stance of a pharaoh. For the priests and local populations who saw these images, her memory lingered not as scandal, but as continuity. She had participated in rituals older than Rome itself, but memory bends under power. Roman writers shaped her into cautionary tale. In their accounts, she was ambition without restraint, desire without discipline, the embodiment of Eastern decadence. This portrayal served Augustus well. By casting his victory as moral restoration rather than civil war, he framed the birth of empire as necessary salvation. Mark Antony, once a celebrated general, was diminished in the same retelling. He became the Roman who lost himself to foreign influence. Cleopatra became the enchantress who threatened Rome's masculine virtue. Together, they were transformed into symbols rather than complex political actors. Yet even as Rome controlled the narrative, fragments of a more layered truth persisted. Coins minted during her reign show a strong, deliberate face, not idealized beauty, but authority. Administrative papyri reveal attention to taxation, economic stabilization, and famine management. During periods of low Nile flood, grain distribution was coordinated carefully. Cleopatra was not absent from governance. She presided over a sophisticated bureaucratic state that had evolved across centuries. Egypt under Roman rule retained much of its administrative structure. The machinery she had used continued to function, now serving imperial interests. Tax records were kept. Census rolls were updated. The rhythms of agricultural life persisted with little interruption. For ordinary farmers along the Nile, the identity of the distant ruler mattered less than the reliability of the flood. Over decades, Alexandria remained a vital intellectual and commercial center. Philosophers debated beneath its colonnades. Traders from India, Arabia, and Nubia passed through its ports. The city became a meeting place of cultures, religions, and ideas. Greek language remained dominant in administration, even under Roman oversight. But the old dynastic aura faded. Without a resident monarch, the palace complex gradually lost its centrality. Earthquakes and coastal shifts would, centuries later, submerge parts of ancient Alexandria beneath the sea. Statues of rulers, perhaps even those commissioned by Cleopatra, now rest beneath dark water, encrusted with coral and silence. As the Roman Empire expanded, Cleopatra's name receded into literature. Plutarch, writing in the late 1st and early 2nd century CE, composed one of the most influential biographies of Antony. In doing so, he painted Cleopatra with complexity unusual for Roman writers. He described her voice as captivating, her intellect as agile, her presence as magnetic, beyond physical beauty. Though still framed within Roman moral structure, his account preserved hints of admiration. It was through Plutarch that later centuries would rediscover her. Medieval Europe, largely disconnected from classical texts, knew little of her beyond fragments. But during the Renaissance, when ancient manuscripts resurfaced and humanist scholars sought to revive Greco-Roman knowledge, Cleopatra returned to cultural imagination. Painters portrayed her final moments with dramatic intensity, the asp poised at her breast, attendants collapsing beside her, silks pooling across marble floors. These images often reflected European aesthetics more than Egyptian reality. Still, they testified to enduring fascination. William Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, written in the early 17th century, deepened her myth. On his stage, she was witty, volatile, intelligent, theatrical, conscious of her own legend. Shakespeare's Cleopatra refuses simplification. She is at once commanding and vulnerable, playful and political. Through drama, she transcended the confines of Roman propaganda. Centuries later, as archaeology advanced and explorers catalogued Egypt's monuments, interest intensified. The decipherment of hieroglyphs in the 19th century reopened ancient voices long silent. Though Cleopatra's reign belonged to a relatively late chapter in pharaonic history, the revival of Egyptian studies naturally revived scrutiny of its last ruler. Modern historians approached her with different tools. Rather than moralizing her alliances, they examined geopolitical realities. Egypt in the 1st century BCE was not the superpower it had once been. It was a wealthy but vulnerable state, positioned beside Rome's expanding sphere. Cleopatra's choices, aligning with Caesar, then with Antony, reflected strategic attempts to preserve autonomy in an era of Roman consolidation. The Battle of Actium, once dramatized as romantic catastrophe, emerged as calculated military engagement, shaped by logistics and naval maneuver. Antony's forces were strained by supply shortages. Agrippa's tactics disrupted communication lines. Cleopatra's withdrawal, often interpreted as panic, may have been pre-planned to preserve remaining ships and treasure for defense in Egypt. The defeat was decisive, not because of emotion, but because of strategic disadvantage. The question of her death continues to invite debate. The story of the ASP, dramatic and symbolically Egyptian, may or may not be literal. Some scholars propose poison administered by other means. A hidden hairpin, a vial concealed within a comb. Ancient sources disagree. What remains constant is her refusal to be displayed in Rome as conquered royalty. In that refusal, lies a final assertion of agency. Today, divers exploring the submerged remains of Alexandria have uncovered statues, sphinxes, and architectural fragments believed to date to the Ptolemaic period. The sea guards its secrets carefully. Perhaps one day, more tangible traces of Cleopatra's palace will surface. Until then, history reconstructs her through coinage, inscriptions, papyri, and the writings of those who often misunderstood her. She lived at the hinge between worlds. The Hellenistic kingdoms born from Alexander's empire were fading. Rome was rising toward imperial dominance. Cleopatra attempted to position Egypt not as passive acquisition, but as active partner. When partnership failed, conquest followed. Yet conquest did not erase her entirely. Her story persists because it resists containment. She was multilingual in a divided land. She embodied both Greek heritage and Egyptian symbolism. She navigated patriarchal power structures with intelligence sharpened by necessity. She was mother to children intended to inherit more than titles. She was strategist in a century defined by civil war. The Nile still flows past temples carved long before her birth. The desert still holds the tombs of kings who ruled 2,000 years before her dynasty existed. In that vast continuum, her reign occupies but a brief span, and yet it marks an ending, the last breath of pharaonic sovereignty before Rome absorbed the ancient kingdom into its vast dominion. When night falls now over the Mediterranean, the pharaoh's lighthouse no longer stands. Earthquakes toppled it long ago. The palace quarter lies partly beneath waves. But the idea of Cleopatra endures, luminous and unsettled. She is remembered not only because she loved powerful men, nor solely because she died dramatically, but because she stood at history's turning point and refused to disappear quietly. In the quiet chambers of scholarship and the grand theatres of art, her figure continues to emerge, reshaped, re-examined, reimagined, and somewhere between documented fact and whispered legend, Cleopatra remains what she always was, a queen born into fragility, who learned to wield intellect as armor, performance as diplomacy, and dignity as her final defense against the tide of empire. If one could walk backward through time along the shoreline of Alexandria, past the modern harbour cranes and the layered ruins of empires, past the Roman columns and Byzantine churches, past the faded outlines of Ptolemaic avenues, one would eventually arrive at a city still gleaming with ambition. In Cleopatra's lifetime, Alexandria was not merely a capital, it was an idea. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, the city had been designed as a bridge between worlds. Its grid of streets stretched wide and deliberate, its harbour engineered to welcome ships from Greece, Phoenicia, Judea, Cyrene, and beyond. The Pharos lighthouse, rising perhaps over 100 meters into the sky, stood among the wonders of the ancient world. At night, its flame pulsed like a star brought down to earth. Cleopatra grew within this environment of layered identities. Greek language filled the court. Egyptian rituals sanctified the temples. Jewish communities flourished in their own quarters. Merchants carried spices, papyrus, glass, incense. Philosophers debated ethics and astronomy beneath painted ceilings. It was a city accustomed to multiplicity, and yet, beneath its cosmopolitan surface, tension persisted. The Ptolemaic dynasty had always occupied an uneasy space between foreign rule and local legitimacy. Earlier, Ptolemies had emphasized Greek identity, often isolating themselves from native traditions. Cleopatra shifted that balance. By learning Egyptian and appearing publicly in pharaonic regalia, she stepped into a lineage older than her own bloodline. This was not mere symbolism. In Egyptian thought, kingship was sacred. The pharaoh was intermediary between gods and people, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, cosmic order, and balance. Flood, harvest, and prosperity were spiritually intertwined with the ruler's virtue. Cleopatra understood that to command loyalty beyond Alexandria's Greek elite, she had to inhabit this sacred role. Reliefs from temples such as Dendera and Edfu depict her in traditional stance, offering wine or incense to deities. Her cartouche encloses her name in hieroglyphs as though she belonged seamlessly to the succession of rulers stretching back millennia. For Egyptian priests, this continuity mattered. It meant rituals could proceed unbroken. It meant divine order had not fractured. But Cleopatra's reign was not defined solely by ritual and romance. It was also marked by economic challenge. The Nile's annual flood determined agricultural yield. When waters rose too low, famine threatened. When they rose too high, destruction followed. Records suggest that during her reign, there were years of insufficient flooding. Managing grain reserves required careful administration. Taxation had to be calibrated to avoid rebellion while sustaining state revenue. Egypt's wealth was legendary, but wealth could evaporate quickly in times of scarcity. Cleopatra's government maintained a centralized bureaucracy inherited from earlier Ptolemies. Officials monitored harvests, collected taxes in kind and coin, regulated trade routes. Papyrus documents discovered in Egypt reveal contracts, census records, and decrees that continued seamlessly across her reign. Governance was not neglected amid diplomatic entanglements. Her court also engaged in broader Mediterranean politics beyond Rome. Relations with neighboring kingdoms required delicate handling. The Eastern Mediterranean was a patchwork of client states, each balancing allegiance to Rome with local autonomy. Cleopatra positioned Egypt as both ally and independent power. Her alliance with Mark Antony extended beyond personal attachment. Antony controlled Rome's eastern territories. By aligning with him, Cleopatra sought to create a counterweight to Octavian in the west. The donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE symbolized this vision. In a grand ceremony, territories were distributed to Cleopatra and her children. Alexander Helios received Armenia and lands beyond. Cleopatra, Selene received Cyrenaica and Crete. Ptolemy Philadelphus received Syria and Cilicia. Caesarion was declared King of Kings. To Roman ears, this proclamation sounded like treason. To Cleopatra, it may have represented restoration of Hellenistic balance, a federation of Eastern realms anchored in Alexandria rather than Rome. Yet the political climate in Rome had hardened. Octavian, methodical and patient, did not confront Antony directly at first. Instead, he shaped perception. Coins minted under his authority emphasized stability, piety, Roman virtue. Cleopatra became the embodiment of excess in contrast to his restraint. The war that culminated at Actium was therefore not merely military. It was ideological. It framed the future of Mediterranean power. After defeat and return to Egypt, Cleopatra did not immediately despair. She attempted negotiation with Octavian. Ancient sources suggest she explored possible alliances even with him, perhaps hoping to secure her children's status in exchange for submission. But Octavian's objective was clear: Egypt will become Roman property. As his forces closed in on Alexandria, Cleopatra secured her treasury within a mausoleum she had prepared. Gold, jewels, and documents were gathered there. The building was both tomb and fortress, symbol of anticipated end. When Antony died from his self-inflicted wound, carried to her through a window of the mausoleum, Cleopatra confronted the narrowing of options. Roman triumph was a ritual humiliation. Captured rulers were paraded in chains before execution or imprisonment. She'd seen what Rome did to its defeated enemies. Her decision to die prevented Octavian from displaying her as spectacle. It also sealed her legend. But history does not end at death. It ripples outward. Egypt under Roman rule entered a different rhythm. Latin did not replace Greek in daily administration. The cultural fabric remained largely Hellenistic. Temples continued for centuries, though gradually imperial cult practices intertwined with local worship. Alexandria became a center of early Christianity in later generations, its scholars shaping theological debates that would echo across continents. The physical traces of Cleopatra's reign faded slowly. Earthquakes in the 4th and 8th centuries toppled structures along the coast. Rising sea levels submerged parts of the ancient city. What had once been palace halls now lie beneath layers of sediment and tide. Yet artifacts endure. Coins bearing her profile still circulate among collectors and museums. Inscriptions carved into temple walls still name her alongside gods. Busts attributed to her survive in marble, though scholars debate their accuracy. Each object offers fragmentary witness. Modern interpretations have shifted again in recent decades. Scholars emphasize her linguistic skill, her economic management, her religious integration. Rather than viewing her as an anomaly, a powerful woman defined by romance, they examine her within the continuum of Hellenistic queenship, where royal women often exercise significant authority. Cleopatra VII was not the first female ruler of Egypt, nor the first Ptolemaic queen to wield influence. But she was the last to rule an independent Egypt before Rome transformed it irrevocably. Perhaps that is why her story lingers. She represents an ending, the final note in a long composition that began when Alexander's generals carved kingdoms from his empire. She stands at the threshold where ancient pharaonic tradition meets imperial Rome, and in the quiet of reflection, beyond spectacle and propaganda, one may imagine her not as legend, but as human, rising before dawn to consult advisors, reviewing reports of harvest yields, practicing languages, preparing arguments for Roman generals, calculating risks that carried the weight of a civilization. Outside her palace windows, the Mediterranean would have shimmered beneath sunlight. Ships would have creaked in their moorings. Somewhere along the Nile, farmers would have watched the waterline anxiously, hoping for a flood that promised abundance. Cleopatra lived within these realities, not only as mythic figure, but as ruler responsible for them. And though Rome absorbed her kingdom, those centuries layered interpretation upon interpretation, the quiet persistence of her name suggests something enduring. Not invincibility, not perfection, but presence. In the long river of history, some figures are swept quickly from view. Others remain visible beneath the surface, refracted by time, yet unmistakable. Cleopatra remains. The Nile continues its patient journey northward, as it did in her lifetime. The desert wind still moves across temple stones, carved with her image. The Mediterranean still touches the shores of Alexandria, whispering against submerged ruins. And somewhere within that enduring landscape, the memory of a queen who stood against the turning of an age drifts. Not lost, not fully knowable, but forever woven into the fabric of the ancient world she refused to surrender quietly. There is a particular stillness that comes at the edge of great transitions. Not silence, but suspension. As though the world itself inhales and holds its breath before stepping forward into something irreversible. Cleopatra lived within that suspended breath. By the time of her birth in 69 BCE, the old order of the Mediterranean was already thinning. The successors of Alexander had carved his empire into kingdoms: Macedon, the Seleucid realm, Pergamon, Egypt. But over generations, those territories weakened under internal rivalry and Roman interference. One by one, they folded into Rome's expanding orbit. Egypt endured longer than most, protected by geography, wealth, and strategic diplomacy. But endurance is not permanence. To understand Cleopatra fully is to understand the fragility she inherited. The Ptolemaic dynasty had long relied on careful balancing, appease Rome enough to avoid invasion, yet maintain sufficient independence to preserve sovereignty. It was a narrowing path, and with each Roman civil war, the balance grew more precarious. When Cleopatra first aligned herself with Julius Caesar, she did so not from infatuation alone, but from political calculus. Caesar was the dominant figure of his generation. His favor meant survival. Her support offered him grain, money, and a stable Eastern ally. It was mutual advantage. After Caesar's assassination, the ground shifted violently. No single Roman leader commanded uncontested authority. Mark Antony controlled the East. Octavian consolidated the West. Cleopatra's decision to align with Antony must be viewed within this fractured reality. Antony required Egypt's resources for his Parthian ambitions. Cleopatra required Roman military backing to secure her throne and defend against rivals. Their partnership created a temporary equilibrium, a vision of shared Eastern power counterbalancing Rome's Western consolidation. But Octavian proved more patient and politically astute. He framed the conflict not as civil war between Romans, but as defense of Rome against foreign corruption. Cleopatra became the symbol that unified Roman anxiety and ambition. It is easy, from a distance of centuries, to reduce her to romance or spectacle. But survival in her world required precision. She navigated male-dominated power structures with strategic awareness. She understood image, ritual, symbolism. She appeared before Egyptians as Pharaoh, before Greeks as Hellenistic monarch, before Romans as cultured ally. She adapted language and posture to context. Few rulers of her era operated across such cultural boundaries with fluency. Even her children were instruments of diplomacy. By assigning territories to them during the donations of Alexandria, she projected continuity beyond her own lifetime. She sought to anchor Egypt within a broader Eastern confederation that might endure regardless of Roman politics. It was a bold gamble. Actium shattered that gamble. Yet defeat did not immediately erase her agency. In the final year, before Octavian's arrival in Alexandria, Cleopatra attempted to stabilize finances, secure remaining allies, and perhaps explore negotiation. Ancient accounts suggest she tested Octavian's intentions carefully. Some even imply she considered aligning with him if it meant preserving her children's rule in some diminished capacity. But Octavian's objective was singular: Egypt as imperial possession, Caesarion eliminated as rival heir. The execution of Caesarion marked the true end of Cleopatra's political vision. Her son embodied a possibility, a bridge between Caesar's lineage and Egyptian sovereignty. With his death, Rome erased that possibility, and so Cleopatra's final act becomes not merely personal despair, but refusal to participate in the narrative imposed upon her. Roman triumphs were carefully staged performances. Captive leaders were paraded through streets, their defeat transformed into spectacle affirming Rome's supremacy. Cleopatra understood this ritual intimately. She would not become its centerpiece. The image of the aspi endures because it merges symbolism with mystery. The serpent was sacred in Egyptian iconography, the ureus representing divine kingship and protection. Whether an actual snake delivered venom or poison was administered differently, the association deepened the mythic resonance of her death. It framed her end not as surrender but as transformation. After her death, Augustus, as Octavian would soon be known, constructed a new Roman order. The Republic gave way to Principate. Peace, the Pax Romana, spread across vast territories. Roads extended, laws standardized. Rome entered a period of relative stability lasting generations. Egypt, absorbed into this system, remained prosperous. Grain shipments flowed reliably. Temples continued functioning under Roman oversight. Greek culture persisted in Alexandria, blending gradually with Roman influence. Yet, something intangible had ended. For nearly 3,000 years, Egypt had been ruled by pharaohs, native or foreign, strong or weak, but always bearing the title that linked them to divine tradition. Cleopatra was the last to hold that mantle in sovereign independence. After her, emperors ruled from afar. They adopted pharaonic imagery in Egyptian temples to legitimize their authority, but they did not reside along the Nile. Centuries later, when Christianity transformed the religious landscape and pagan temples closed, the memory of pharaonic ritual faded further. The language of hieroglyphs fell silent. Monuments endured, but their voices were lost. It was only in the 19th century, with the decipherment of hieroglyphic script, that scholars could again read inscriptions from Cleopatra's time. Her name emerged from stone, not as legend, but as record. Cartouches carved by artisans who never imagined their work would lie unread for nearly 2 millennia. Archaeology in Alexandria continues even now. Beneath modern streets and submerged beneath harbour waters lie remnants of palaces and statues from the Ptolemaic age. Divers have recovered colossal figures of rulers and sphinxes that once adorned ceremonial spaces. Though absolute identification remains debated, some fragments may have stood within Cleopatra's own palace district. History often reduces individuals to archetypes. Cleopatra has been cast as seductress, strategist, victim, manipulator, heroine. Each portrayal reflects the values of the era interpreting her. But beneath archetype was a woman navigating extraordinary instability. She ruled for over 2 decades, no small feat in a century, defined by assassinations and shifting alliances. She preserved Egypt's relative independence longer than many contemporaries preserved their own thrones. She engaged directly in diplomacy rather than serving as passive figurehead. And perhaps most strikingly, She refused to be forgotten, not by deliberate design, perhaps, but by the force of her choices at history's edge. She aligned herself with the most powerful figures of her time, not from submission, but from calculated partnership. She presented herself as living goddess to her people, while negotiating as equal with Roman generals. She wagered her future on the possibility that Egypt could remain more than province. She lost that wager. Yet loss does not erase significance. When modern visitors stand among the ruins of ancient Egypt, at Dendera, where reliefs still show her profile beside Caesarion, they witness a rare convergence. The final pharaoh depicted in traditional form, carved into temple walls that had already seen 2,000 years of kings. The desert wind moves across those carvings as it has across countless reigns. Sand shifts. Time accumulates. Cleopatra's life occupies a brief span within that immensity. Yet it marks a threshold. The end of the Hellenistic age. The absorption of Egypt into Roman Empire. The transition from ancient kingdom to imperial province. In the quiet of reflection, one might imagine her standing upon the palace terrace in Alexandria, looking out over the harbour at dusk. The lighthouse flame flickers against darkening sky. Ships sway gently at anchor. The scent of salt and incense mingles in evening air. Behind her lie generations of rulers who claimed divine lineage. Before her lies an uncertain horizon shaped by Rome's ambition. She cannot see the centuries ahead, the emperors, the saints, the scholars, the archaeologists, the playwrights. She knows only the immediate weight of decisions that will determine whether Egypt remains sovereign or becomes memory. The choices she makes ripple outward long after her death, and so her story lingers, not because it ends in triumph, but because it ends at transformation. The Nile continues to rise and fall. Alexandria continues to evolve. Empires rise, empires dissolve, but somewhere within the long continuum of human history, Cleopatra stands at that suspended breath, poised between worlds, luminous against the turning tide. And in that pause, before the curtain lowers fully, her presence remains. If we move even further inward, beyond the battles and decrees, beyond Rome's proclamations and temple carvings, we arrive at something quieter. The interior life of a ruler who lived surrounded by spectacle, but governed through thought. Cleopatra's world was loud with ceremony. Trumpets announced arrivals. Incense clouded sanctuaries. Courtiers bowed. Scribes recorded. Soldiers drilled in courtyards of stone. Yet power, for her, depended less on display than on perception. Ancient accounts emphasize her voice, not its sweetness alone, but its flexibility. Plutarch describes it as an instrument capable of adapting to conversation like a finely tuned lyre. This detail, small yet persistent, hints at something essential. Cleopatra's strength lay in communication. She persuaded, she conversed, she understood timing. In a court where factions shifted like desert sand, persuasion could be more decisive than force. Unlike many rulers who inherited stable thrones, Cleopatra came of age amid instability. Her father's exile taught her that legitimacy was negotiable. Her sister's brief reign and execution revealed how swiftly blood ties could become liabilities. From youth, she learned that survival required anticipation. Language became her bridge. By speaking Egyptian, she connected to priesthoods and local elites, beyond Alexandria's Greek aristocracy. By speaking Greek fluently, she maintained continuity with her dynasty's Macedonian roots. In dealing with Romans, she employed not only translators, but direct address when possible, shaping impressions personally. In the ancient world, multilingual rulers were rare. Communication typically passed through intermediaries. Cleopatra reduced that distance. She could hear nuance without filter. Her education in philosophy likely exposed her to Stoic and Epicurean thought, to debates about fate, virtue, and governance. Alexandria's intellectual climate encouraged inquiry. Though much of the library's original collection had suffered damage long before her reign, scholarly activity endured. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine. These disciplines thrived in varying degrees. It is tempting to imagine Cleopatra in discussion with scholars, absorbing arguments about the cosmos, even as she managed earthly affairs. While direct evidence is limited, her upbringing makes such engagement plausible. She was not raised in isolation from intellectual currents. She was formed within them. Yet intellect alone could not shield her from Rome's machinery. When Julius Caesar entered Alexandria, he brought not only legions, but Roman expectation. Cleopatra met him with theatrical boldness, yes. But beneath that boldness lay assessment. Caesar was pragmatic. He valued loyalty and resource stability. Egypt offered both. Their relationship, often romanticized, functioned within mutual calculation. Cleopatra secured restoration. Caesar secured grain and Eastern alliance. The birth of Caesarion complicated this alignment. A son linking Caesar's name to Egyptian throne carried implications beyond personal affection. When Cleopatra visited Rome, she stepped into a city suspicious of monarchy. Her presence there was delicate. She represented a foreign queen, residing within a republic struggling against its own transition. Statues erected in her honor by Caesar were provocative gestures, perhaps signaling his own ambitions. Her return to Egypt after Caesar's assassination must have felt like retreat from an unstable shore. Rome descended again into violence. Aligning with Mark Antony offered renewed leverage. Antony, unlike Octavian, possessed military charisma and Eastern focus. He valued Egypt's wealth and Cleopatra's counsel. Their court in Alexandria became a fusion of cultures, Roman officers mingling with Greek administrators, Egyptian ritual blending with Hellenistic display. Critics in Rome interpreted this as decadence, but from another perspective, it represented synthesis, an attempt to construct an alternative center of power in the Eastern Mediterranean. The donations of Alexandria symbolized that attempt. By distributing territories to her children, Cleopatra projected a dynastic future, not dependent solely on Rome's approval. It was audacious. It was also provocative. Octavian capitalized on that provocation. He framed Antony as having abandoned Roman virtue for Eastern luxury. Cleopatra became the embodiment of that narrative. Coins and speeches reinforced the image. In truth, both sides engaged in calculated propaganda. Cleopatra understood imagery as well as Octavian did. Her presentation as Isis to Egyptian subjects reinforced divine legitimacy. Her appearance as Aphrodite to Antony evoked Hellenistic mythic resonance. She navigated symbolism consciously. After Actium, the collapse of that constructed Eastern vision must have been palpable. Reports of desertions, dwindling resources, shifting loyalties. These realities pressed inward. And yet, during those final months in Alexandria, Cleopatra did not immediately succumb to despair. She tested options. Some ancient sources suggest she experimented with poisons, seeking one that would produce painless death, should capture become inevitable. Whether apocryphal or factual, the story reflects awareness of narrowing paths. Her meeting with Octavian after Antony's death is described as composed. She presented herself with dignity, perhaps attempting once more to negotiate terms for her children. Octavian, however, had no intention of preserving Caesarion. Cleopatra would not be permitted to maintain symbolic sovereignty. When she chose death, she reclaimed narrative control. History often grants men the language of strategy, and women the language of emotion. Cleopatra's life challenges that division. Her emotional relationships existed within strategic frameworks. Her alliances were both personal and political. To separate them entirely is to misunderstand the era in which she lived. She ruled during a time when marriage, lineage, and partnership were instruments of statecraft. Affection and ambition intertwined frequently among rulers of antiquity. Cleopatra operated within that norm. What distinguishes her is endurance of memory. Many Hellenistic monarchs vanished into obscurity once Rome absorbed their territories. Their names survive in academic texts, but rarely in popular imagination. Cleopatra transcended that fate. Part of this endurance stems from timing. She stood at Rome's threshold of empire, interacting with figures, Caesar, Antony, Augustus, whose legacies shaped Western historical narrative profoundly. Her story became interwoven with theirs. Part stems from documentation. Roman writers, even when hostile, recorded her presence vividly. Their criticisms preserved her visibility. And part stems from the sheer drama of her life's arc. Exile and restoration, alliance and betrayal, battle and suicide. It possesses the structure of tragedy, and tragedy endures. But beneath that dramatic arc remains the quieter truth of governance, adaptation, and intellect. She was not the first female ruler of Egypt. Hatshepsut had reigned more than a millennium before her. Arsinoe II, a Ptolemaic predecessor, wielded influence within the same dynasty. Cleopatra inherited a lineage in which royal women could exercise authority, yet she inherited it at its most fragile moment. Her reign of 21 years is, in itself, testament to resilience. Many rulers of that turbulent century met quicker ends. She navigated civil war within Egypt, civil war within Rome, famine, shifting alliances, and ideological assault. When we imagine her now, it is often through lenses polished by art and cinema. Coal-lined eyes, gilded barges, whispered seductions. These images are powerful but incomplete. There was also the young queen studying languages in palace chambers, the strategist drafting correspondence to Roman commanders, the mother calculating futures for her children, the ruler monitoring Nile levels with concern for harvest yields. There was the woman standing within a mausoleum of her own making, knowing the tide had turned irrevocably, yet choosing how the story would close. Empires measure success by conquest and longevity. Individuals measure it by survival and meaning. Cleopatra's empire fell, her dynasty ended, yet her name endured beyond the empire that conquered her. Augustus built monuments proclaiming peace and restoration. His empire lasted centuries. But ask, across time, which names echo most vividly of that era, and Cleopatra's remains among them. Not because she defeated Rome, she did not, but because she met it, intellectually, politically, symbolically, and forced it to define itself in opposition to her. In the end, perhaps that is why she lingers at the edge of collective memory. She were not absorbed quietly. She marked the moment of transition with defiance. And so the river flows on. The desert wind continues its low song across temple walls, bearing her carved likeness. The Mediterranean washes against submerged stones of ancient Alexandria. The world she knew has vanished, yet the shape of her life remains discernible, like a constellation traced across dark sky. Distant, refracted, yet unmistakably there, Cleopatra, last pharaoh of Egypt, stands still at that horizon where one age closed and another began. And even now, in the quiet unfolding of history, her presence does not fade. There is a tendency, when looking backward across 2,000 years, to imagine inevitability. Rome was rising, therefore Egypt would fall. Augustus was consolidating power, therefore Cleopatra's resistance was doomed. History, when compressed into textbooks and timelines, can feel like a straight road. But for those living inside it, nothing feels inevitable. Cleopatra did not wake each morning believing she was the final sovereign of a fading age. She ruled in the present tense. In negotiations, in harvest reports, in alliances that still seemed capable of holding. The outcome was uncertain until it was no longer. To understand the full weight of her life, one must imagine the atmosphere of that uncertainty. After Actium, in 31 BCE, the Mediterranean did not instantly declare Octavian master. Antony and Cleopatra still commanded resources in Egypt. Alexandria remained fortified. Treasure remained in vaults. Armies, though diminished, still stood. For nearly a year, possibility lingered. Cleopatra may have hoped that Octavian's position was less secure than it appeared. Rome had endured cycles of victory and reversal before. Loyalties shifted quickly in civil war. If Antony could regroup, if eastern provinces rallied, if Octavian faltered, the balance might tilt again. But Octavian advanced with patience rather than haste. He secured territories systematically, isolating Egypt diplomatically before striking militarily. Former allies drifted away. Local rulers calculated survival and chose Rome. Within Alexandria, tension thickened. The city that had once celebrated Cleopatra's theatrical entries now watched Roman forces draw nearer. The harbour that had launched her gilded barge now faced blockade. Antony's final military engagements near Alexandria ended in defeat. Accounts describe confusion, desertion, dwindling morale. The once formidable triumvir was reduced to desperation. Cleopatra withdrew to the mausoleum she had constructed, a structure intended both as tomb and treasury. It was filled with gold, silver, jewels, and documents of state. Some sources suggest she threatened to burn its contents rather than surrender them to Octavian. Leveraging wealth as bargaining chip, this image, a queen inside her own monument, surrounded by symbols of power, while that power slips beyond reach, carries profound symbolism. The mausoleum was both fortress and acknowledgement of mortality. It was preparation and defiance at once. When Antony, misinformed that Cleopatra had taken her life, fell upon his sword, the tragedy intensified. Mortally wounded, he was lifted to her through a window because the doors were barred. Ancient writers dwell on this moment. The wounded general dying in the arms of the queen he had aligned his fate with. It is impossible to know what passed between them in those final exchanges. History preserves only fragments filtered through later narration, but the scene, whether embellished or precise, captures the convergence of personal and political collapse. After Antony's death, Cleopatra faced Octavian alone. Their meeting is described as measured. She did not appear broken. She presented herself with dignity, perhaps in simple attire rather than royal splendor. She tested his intentions carefully. Octavian, only in his early 30s, had already mastered restraint. He reassured her publicly, but privately ensured Caesarion would not escape. When Caesarion was captured and executed, Cleopatra's last strategic avenue closed. Her son, the living bridge between Julius Caesar and Egypt, was gone. Octavian reportedly remarked that too many Caesars is not good, a cold acknowledgement of political necessity. Cleopatra's remaining children by Antony were spared, taken to Rome, and eventually integrated into Roman aristocratic networks. Cleopatra. Selene's later marriage to Juba II of Mauritania allowed a distant echo of her mother's lineage to persist, though far from the Nile. The final days before Cleopatra's death carry layers of speculation. Some ancient sources describe her experimenting with various poisons on condemned prisoners to determine which caused least suffering, whether factual or apocryphal. Such stories suggest deliberation rather than impulse. On August 12th, 30 BCE, she dressed in royal attire one last time. Accounts differ on details, but most agree she arranged herself ceremonially before death. The asp, Simbapul, of Egyptian kingship appears in many retellings. The serpent's bite would have evoked the uraeus worn upon the pharaoh's crown, transforming death into final assertion of sovereignty. Whether serpent or concealed toxin, the outcome was the same. Octavian found her lifeless, beyond his ability to parade her through Rome. In death, she denied him that spectacle. Her burial beside Antony was permitted. Even conquerors sometimes respect the dramatic symmetry of fallen rivals. With her death, a line stretching back to Ptolemy I ended. More profoundly, the era of independent Hellenistic kingdoms closed. Egypt became Roman province. The Mediterranean entered a new political configuration under Augustus. Yet Cleopatra's influence did not vanish with her body. In Rome, poets and historians shaped her memory to suit imperial narrative. She was portrayed as dangerous enchantress, embodiment of Eastern excess. This depiction justified Rome's conquest as moral victory, but over time, interpretation evolved. In late antiquity, she became a figure of tragic grandeur. In medieval chronicles, she appeared as cautionary example of pride and desire. Renaissance humanists rediscovered classical accounts and revived her complexity. Shakespeare granted her emotional depth and theatrical vitality unmatched by earlier portrayals. Each era remade her according to its own anxieties and fascinations. In modern scholarship, efforts have been made to peel back layers of propaganda. Coins minted in her reign show a ruler with prominent features, deliberate gaze, not stylized beauty, but authority. Inscriptions confirm administrative competence. Archaeological discoveries in Alexandria's harbour continue to reveal physical remnants of her world. The image of Cleopatra reclining amid luxury has gradually given way to recognition of her political intelligence. She maintained Egypt's independence longer than many neighbouring states. She navigated Roman power struggles with remarkable agility. She ruled actively rather than symbolically, Her story also complicates simplistic narratives of gender in antiquity. She operated in a sphere dominated by male generals and senators, yet commanded fleets, negotiated alliances, and shaped international politics. She leveraged perception not as weakness, but a strategic tool. Perhaps that is why she endures, not merely because she loved, nor because she died dramatically, but because she embodied transition. She stood at the crossroads of cultures, Greek, Egyptian, Roman, and attempted to weave them into something stable amid turbulence. She did not succeed in preserving Egypt's sovereignty. But failure does not negate magnitude. In the centuries following her death, Egypt continued to shape world history. As Roman breadbasket, as center of early Christian theology, as province contested by Byzantines and Arabs, as land of scholars and saints. But it would never again produce a pharaoh ruling independently from Alexandria. Cleopatra was the last to carry that mantle. When modern travelers visit the temple at Dendera and see her carved in stone beside Caesarion, they witness more than artistry. They witness the final assertion of a tradition thousands of years old. Her image there stands within a lineage that includes Ramses and Thutmose, rulers separated from her by millennia, yet connected through sacred kingship. The desert wind passes over those carvings now as it did in her lifetime. Sand gathers in corners. The sky above remains immense and unchanging. Time has softened the sharp edges of Roman propaganda. It has blurred certain details while sharpening others. But Cleopatra's presence persists, not fixed, not fully knowable, but resilient. She remains a figure who compels reconsideration. Was she primarily strategist or romantic, devout pharaoh or pragmatic politician, victim of imperial ambition or architect of her own fate? The answer is likely all of these at once. History rarely grants singular identities to complex lives. Cleopatra inhabited contradictions. She was Greek by blood, yet Egyptian in ritual. She was monarch in a republican age. She was woman commanding armies in a world structured for male authority. She navigated these contradictions with skill, sharpened by necessity. And so, when we look back across the long corridor of centuries, Cleopatra does not appear as faint outline. She stands illuminated by the very forces that sought to diminish her. Rome conquered Egypt. Augustus reshaped the Mediterranean. Empires rose and fell thereafter. But Cleopatra, last pharaoh, strategist, mother, ruler at the edge of empire, remains etched into the memory of history. The Nile still flows northward, steady and indifferent to human ambition. The Mediterranean still touches the shores of Alexandria. The lighthouse is gone, the palace submerged, the dynasty ended. Yet her name endures, carried forward not by empire, but by story. And in that endurance, she achieves a form of immortality that conquest alone could never secure. When we step back far enough, the life of Cleopatra becomes less a sequence of events and more a threshold. A narrow bridge between worlds that could not coexist for long. Behind her stretched the age of divine kingship along the Nile, an inheritance older than most civilizations that followed it. Ahead of her stood Rome's imperial machinery, disciplined and relentless, uninterested in sharing permanence. Cleopatra did not merely live at this intersection, she embodied it. The Egypt she ruled was already layered with centuries of adaptation. The pyramids were ancient even in her time. The great temples of Karnak and Luxor were relics of distant dynasties. The language of hieroglyphs carried echoes of rulers whose names she likely studied as part of her education in legitimacy. Yet Alexandria, her capital, faced outward toward the Mediterranean. Greek philosophy shaped its intellectual life. Its architecture bore colonnades rather than pylons. Its ruling class spoke in the cadences of Homer rather than in the chants of ancient priesthood. Cleopatra stood at the meeting point of these currents. Her genius, perhaps, was not in choosing one identity over another, but in holding both simultaneously. She did not reject her Macedonian heritage. She embraced the imagery of Hellenistic queenship, appearing as Aphrodite, cultivating refinement, engaging in Greek rhetorical tradition. At the same time, she stepped fully into the sacred symbolism of Egyptian pharaohs, allowing herself to be depicted in relief performing rituals unchanged for centuries. This duality made her adaptable. It also made her dangerous in Roman eyes. Rome, for all its pragmatism, prized cultural dominance. It absorbed Greek art and philosophy, yet insisted on political supremacy. Cleopatra's court, blending Eastern wealth and Hellenistic sophistication, represented an alternative model of Mediterranean power, one centered not in Rome, but in Alexandria. Had Antony prevailed at Actium, history might have recorded a different alignment. An Eastern Mediterranean bloc anchored in Egypt could have rivaled Rome's west. The capital of empire might have shifted toward the Nile. Latin might never have achieved its later centrality. Christianity's spread, Roman law's codification, the very shape of Europe, all might have unfolded differently. Such speculation remains hypothetical, yet it underscores the magnitude of that moment. Actium was not merely naval engagement, it was decision point in civilizational trajectory. After Cleopatra's death, Augustus integrated Egypt seamlessly into Roman structure. Grain stabilized Rome's population. Wealth funded monumental architecture. The empire flourished under centralized authority. Stability followed chaos. From Rome's perspective, the outcome was triumph. But from Egypt's perspective, something irreplaceable had ended. Pharaonic sovereignty had persisted through invasions before: Persians, Assyrians, Nubians. Yet always a ruler emerged who adopted the mantle locally. Cleopatra's death marked the first time in millennia that Egypt would be governed permanently from outside its cultural framework. Roman emperors adopted pharaonic imagery when depicted in Egyptian temples, but they did not reside among the Nile's rhythms. The sacred kingship that linked ruler to flood and harvest dissolved into distant administration. Cleopatra, in that sense, was not merely last of her dynasty, she was last of a continuous political theology. Yet history rarely honors continuity as loudly as it honors conquest. In the centuries following her death, Egypt's religious landscape shifted gradually. The old gods persisted for generations under Roman rule, but Christianity eventually transformed temples into churches. Hieroglyphs, once sacred script, became unreadable symbols. The language Cleopatra had learned to strengthen legitimacy vanished from common speech, and yet her image survived where others faded. Part of this survival lies in narrative drama, the romance with Caesar and Antony, the suicide, the spectacle. But part lies in historical documentation. Roman writers, even when critical, preserved her presence vividly. They found her compelling enough to describe in detail. Over time, artists seized upon that vividness. Renaissance painters imagined her chambers drenched in gold. Baroque sculptors captured her final repose. 19th century Orientalist art draped her in exotic splendor, often projecting European fantasies onto ancient Egypt. In the 20th century, cinema amplified these visions. Cleopatra became spectacle once more. Larger than life, adorned in jewels and dramatic eyeliner. Yet even within dramatization, fascination with her intellect persisted. Modern historians have worked to disentangle myth from evidence. Archaeological discoveries in Alexandria's submerged harbour have revealed colossal statues and architectural fragments from the Ptolemaic era. Though precise attribution remains debated, they provide tangible connection to the environment she inhabited. Coins bearing her likeness offer perhaps the most direct visual testimony. Her features appear strong, deliberate, not stylized beauty, but authority. These coins circulated through markets and ports, carrying her profile across Mediterranean trade networks. They declared sovereignty in metal. Administrative papyri from her reign reveal continuity in taxation and bureaucracy. Grain shipments were tracked, land surveys conducted, legal contracts recorded. Cleopatra did not preside over chaos. She governed an organized state. This combination of spectacle and structure defines her legacy. She understood performance as a political tool. Her arrival in Tarsus to meet Antony was choreographed to maximum effect. Sails dyed purple, attendants dressed as mythic figures. But such theatre served diplomatic objectives. It was persuasion embodied. Similarly, her presentation as Isis to Egyptian subjects reinforced divine legitimacy. In a land where sacred kingship anchored cosmic order, appearing as living goddess strengthened stability. Rome recognized this power of imagery. Augustus countered with his own symbolism. Coins depicting peace, monuments proclaiming restoration of tradition. Cleopatra became foil against which he defined himself. Yet 2,000 years later, her image remains as recognizable as his, perhaps because she represents something enduringly human: resistance against inevitability, assertion of identity amid overwhelming force. She didn't passively accept Rome's expansion. She engaged with it, negotiated with it, aligned with it when beneficial, opposed it when necessary. She gambled, calculated, adapted. She also loved, bore children, and faced loss. In her final days, when Octavian's victory became undeniable, she chose her manner of departure. That choice resonates across centuries. It was not surrender. It was agency reclaimed at the last possible moment. Standing at the edge of her story now, we see more than romance or ruin. We see a ruler shaped by education, sharpened by exile, elevated by alliance, undone by geopolitical tides beyond any single individual's control. The Nile continues to rise and fall as it did in her lifetime. Farmers still watch its waters. Alexandria, though transformed, remains city of layered history. Beneath modern foundations lie fragments of her world. Cleopatra herself remains suspended between fact and legend. She cannot be fully disentangled from either, yet perhaps that is fitting. She lived at a boundary between eras, embodying transition. Her life resists simple categorization because it unfolded during transformation too vast for simplicity. And so, her name endures, whispered in scholarship, painted on canvas, spoken in theatres, studied in classrooms. Cleopatra, last Pharaoh of Egypt, queen of a fading Hellenistic world, strategist in the shadow of Rome. She did not preserve her kingdom. but she preserved her presence in history. And in that presence, luminous against the turning of ages, she remains. There is a quiet irony in the way history remembers its endings. Empires fall with thunder, cities burn, rulers die, and yet what lingers is often not the clash of armies, but the image of a single figure standing at the brink. Cleopatra has become that figure for the end of ancient Egypt's sovereignty. Not because she ruled the longest, nor because she commanded the largest armies, but because she stood at the final threshold. If we allow ourselves to drift gently backward once more, past the noise of battle and the rhetoric of Rome, we find a young queen seated at a table strewn with scrolls. Oil lamps flicker softly. Outside, the Mediterranean breathes against the harbour walls. Within the palace, translators, scribes, and advisors wait for instruction. Cleopatra reads. She reads reports of Nile levels and projected grain yields. She reads correspondence from Roman officials, weighing tone as much as content. She reads intelligence from Eastern territories, gauging whether alliances are stable or fraying. She studies the map of a world in motion. This quieter image of a ruler engaged in study may not inspire epic paintings, yet it captures something essential. Cleopatra's power was never solely theatrical. It was analytical. She inherited a state that had long functioned through centralized administration. The Ptolemies had developed one of the most sophisticated bureaucracies of the Hellenistic world. Taxes were recorded meticulously. Agricultural production was tracked carefully. Trade routes were monitored. Cleopatra stepped into this machinery not as ornament, but as operator. During years of low flood, when famine threatened parts of the eastern Mediterranean, Egypt's grain stores became strategic leverage. Cleopatra understood the value of surplus. Grain was more persuasive than gold. It fed armies. It stabilized cities. It bought loyalty. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony cannot be separated from this economic foundation. Egypt's wealth, agricultural and financial, gave her bargaining power. Without it, she would have been merely another regional monarch seeking Roman favor. Even her famed journey to meet Antony at Tarsus, often romanticized beyond recognition, reveals strategic calculation. She arrived not as supplicant, but as sovereign spectacle, signaling wealth and confidence. She transformed negotiation into performance, ensuring that she would not be overlooked or underestimated. Such acts required nerve. The ancient world was not forgiving toward female authority. Yet, Cleopatra commanded fleets, addressed assemblies, negotiated treaties. She did so in a political culture that often sought to diminish women's roles. Roman propaganda exploited gendered stereotypes to frame her as manipulative temptress rather than capable strategist. But the very intensity of that propaganda suggests how seriously she was taken. Octavian did not need to vilify minor opponents. He reserved narrative assault for those who threatened him meaningfully. Cleopatra's portrayal as dangerous and decadent was political necessity. By casting her as enemy of Roman virtue, he strengthened his own moral legitimacy. And yet, once she was gone, Rome did not erase her memory entirely. Her story was too compelling. Instead, it was reshaped. Plutarch, writing generations later, offered a more nuanced account than earlier Roman polemic. He described her wit, her conversational skill, her ability to make herself irresistible, not by beauty alone, but by intelligence and adaptability. His biography ensured that Cleopatra would be remembered as more than caricature. Over centuries, artists and writers returned to her repeatedly. Shakespeare gave her emotional complexity that transcended moral judgment. Later, historians revisited original sources, questioning assumptions inherited from Roman victors. Modern archaeology adds new dimensions. Underwater excavations in Alexandria's eastern harbour have uncovered statues, columns, sphinxes, remnants of the royal quarter, where Cleopatra once walked. Though absolute identification remains cautious, these findings ground her story in physical reality. Coins bearing her profile continue to circulate through museums and collections. They show a ruler with aquiline features, strong jaw, deliberate expression. These were not vanity portraits. They were political statements, declarations of sovereignty stamped in metal. What makes Cleopatra's story enduring is not simply that she loved powerful men or died dramatically. It is that she navigated the collapse of an age with agency intact until the very end. She did not retreat into obscurity after exile. She returned with army and secured her throne. She did not shrink from Rome's civil wars. She inserted herself strategically into their outcomes. She did not surrender passively to Octavian's triumph. She chose her own conclusion. And yet, for all this strength, she was human. She faced uncertainty. She witnessed betrayal. She endured the execution of her sister, the death of her brother husband, the assassination of Caesar, the defeat of Antony, the capture and execution of Caesarion. Her life contained both grandeur and grief. When she died in 30 BCE, she was 39 years old. Younger than many who would later tell her story. Her reign, spanning 21 years, had carried Egypt through one of the most volatile periods of Mediterranean history. After her death, Augustus solidified the Roman Empire. The Pax Romana ushered in relative peace and prosperity across vast territories. From Rome's vantage point, Cleopatra's fall was necessary prelude to stability. But history does not belong solely to victors. It also belongs to those who resisted the tide, who stood at transition points and shaped outcomes, even in defeat. Cleopatra's life marks the end of pharaonic independence, but it also marks the final flowering of Hellenistic ambition in the East. Through her, the legacy of Alexander's fragmented empire made one last attempt at coherence. It failed. Yet failure does not erase significance. When visitors stand today among the temples of Egypt and see her carved in stone beside the gods, they witness a ruler who consciously placed herself within a lineage stretching back millennia. When they read Roman texts describing her presence, they encounter a woman formidable enough to unsettle empire. The Nile still flows northward, indifferent to conquest. Alexandria's shoreline continues to shift, layers of history settling beneath modern life. The lighthouse that once guided her ships has long since fallen, yet its memory persists in ancient descriptions. So too does hers. Cleopatra remains suspended between myth and document, between romance and strategy, between East and West. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was a Hellenistic queen fluent in multiple worlds. She was ally and adversary of Rome. She was mother, ruler, diplomat, and final guardian of a sovereignty that had endured for 3,000 years. And when the tide turned beyond recovery, she chose dignity over display. Empires rise and dissolve. Names are forgotten. But some figures standing at the hinge of history leave impressions deeper than conquest. Cleopatra is one of them. And in the long quiet after her era's thunder faded, her story did not disappear. It continued, carried by scrolls, carved in stone, painted on canvas, spoken on stages, whispered across centuries, not as mere legend, but as memory of a queen who stood at the edge of empire and met it unflinchingly. If we allow the story to slow even further, to loosen its hold on battle dates and political maneuvers, we arrive at something more enduring than events. We arrive at legacy. Cleopatra's life ended in 30 BCE, but her afterlife began immediately. In Rome, Augustus carefully curated memory. Public monuments celebrated victory at Actium. The Temple of Apollo on the Palatine rose as symbol of divine favor. Coins commemorated peace restored to a fractured republic. Cleopatra's defeat became proof of Rome's moral and military supremacy. Yet even as Augustus shaped the narrative, Cleopatra resisted containment within it. The Roman poet Horace described her as a queen determined to die. Marveling at her courage even while condemning her ambition, there is, within his lines, a grudging respect. She was enemy, yes, but not trivial. This tension in Roman sources is revealing. Cleopatra could not be dismissed as insignificant. She had altered the course of Roman civil war. She had commanded fleets and treasure. She had stood at the center of events that birthed the Roman Empire itself. And so, though vilified, she endured. As generations passed, Roman hostility softened into fascination. Writers revisited her not merely as cautionary tale, but as character study. Plutarch's account, composed more than a century after her death, would become the primary source through which later ages encountered her. In his telling, she is intelligent, playful, manipulative, affectionate, theatrical, fully human rather than abstract villain. Through Plutarch, Cleopatra entered the bloodstream of European literature. When Shakespeare wrote Antony and Cleopatra in the early 17th century, he drew heavily upon Plutarch's narrative. But Shakespeare added something else: interiority. His Cleopatra is aware of her myth as it forms. She speaks of how she will be staged in Rome, caricatured by quick comedians. She anticipates distortion. In this, Shakespeare's creation feels uncannily modern. Art followed literature. Painters of the Renaissance and Baroque periods rendered her death scene repeatedly. The ass became visual shorthand for tragic sovereignty. Draped in silk, pale against darkened chamber, Cleopatra transformed into icon of defiant beauty. Yet these artistic visions often revealed more about the societies producing them than about ancient Egypt. European artists imagined her through their own ideals of femininity and power. Cleopatra became canvas upon which each era projected its anxieties about female authority. In the 19th century, as European powers expanded into North Africa and the Middle East, interest in ancient Egypt intensified. Archaeological expeditions uncovered temples and tombs long buried by sand. Hieroglyphs, once mysterious, were deciphered after the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. For the first time in centuries, scholars could read inscriptions carved during Cleopatra's reign. Her name, written within a cartouche, emerged from stone with clarity. No longer dependent solely on Roman narratives, historians could anchor her existence in Egyptian record. Reliefs at Dendera showed her performing rituals beside Caesarion. These images confirmed her integration into traditional pharaonic kingship. The 20th century amplified her legend further. Cinema, with its appetite for grandeur, embraced Cleopatra eagerly. Silent films depicted her as seductress of empire. Later productions presented lavish spectacle, gilded barges and towering sets, recreating Alexandria's imagined splendor. Actresses embodied her with charisma, that blurred line between history and performance. Yet even as popular culture dramatized her, academic scholarship continued refining understanding. Modern historians examine Cleopatra not as anomaly, but as product of Hellenistic political culture. Royal women in this era often wielded significant authority. Marriage alliances, co-regencies, and dynastic politics frequently placed queens in positions of influence. Cleopatra's assertiveness was not unprecedented within her context, though the scale of her impact was extraordinary. Scholars also emphasize economic dimensions of her reign. Egypt's centralized bureaucracy functioned effectively under her leadership. Grain exports were managed strategically. Currency reforms stabilized aspects of the economy. These administrative achievements rarely capture imagination as vividly as romance, yet they formed backbone of her power. Archaeology in Alexandria continues to uncover fragments of the world she knew. Earthquakes and shifting coastlines submerged parts of the ancient royal quarter. Divers exploring beneath modern harbour waters have found colossal statues and architectural remains dating to the Ptolemaic period. Though certainty eludes some identifications, these discoveries offer tangible reminders that Cleopatra's palace once stood where waves now move silently overhead. In museums around the world, coins bearing her profile rest behind glass. Her features, strong nose, firm chin, confront viewers with immediacy that paintings cannot replicate. These coins circulated in her lifetime, passed through markets and ports, touching hands that lived and died 2 millennia ago. Such artifacts tether legend to reality. Yet perhaps Cleopatra's most enduring legacy lies not in objects, but in questions. She prompts inquiry into how history is written, how victors shape narrative, how gender influences portrayal, how myth overlays fact. She invites reconsideration of simplistic binaries, seductress or stateswoman, victim or manipulator, romantic heroine or calculating monarch. She resists reduction. In the quiet of contemplation, one might imagine Alexandria at dusk during her reign. The harbour alive with lanterns, the Pharaoh's lighthouse casting steady flame across darkening sea. Within the palace, voices speaking Greek and Egyptian, Latin, and perhaps other tongues, weaving strategies in lamplit rooms. Cleopatra moves through these spaces not as symbol, but as participant. She listens, speaks, calculates. She laughs at times. She worries at others. She stands on balconies overlooking Mediterranean wind and considers futures uncertain. History often fossilizes its subjects. It turns them into statues, flattening complexity into single posture. But Cleopatra somehow remains fluid. Perhaps because she lived at the fluid edge of transformation, when republic became empire, when Hellenistic kingdoms dissolved into Roman provinces, when ancient pharaonic continuity reached its terminus. Her life marked the end of something immeasurably old. After her, Egypt would never again be ruled by one of its own in sovereign independence. Emperors in distant capitals would adopt pharaonic imagery ceremonially, but they would not walk daily along the Nile's banks as native kings. Cleopatra was the last to do so, and in that finality lies weight. She stands not merely as historical figure, but as embodiment of transition. the last light of a lineage flickering before dawn of another age. When we trace the arc of her life from palace-born child to ruler in exile, from ally of Caesar to partner of Antony, from sovereign strategist to defiant queen, choosing death over humiliation, we see more than drama. We see continuity meeting change. We see ancient tradition confronting expanding empire. We see a woman refusing to be erased quietly. And though Rome conquered Egypt, though Augustus reshaped the Mediterranean world, Cleopatra's name endures alongside theirs, not subordinate, not forgotten. The Nile continues its ancient rhythm. The desert wind continues its low song over temple walls. The Mediterranean continues to touch the shores of Alexandria, where her palace once stood. Empires fade, languages evolve, monuments crumble. Yet across more than 2,000 years, Cleopatra remains, luminous at the edge of memory. Neither wholly myth nor entirely document, but something in between. A queen at the hinge of history. And in that still, suspended place between what was and what would be, she continues to stand. If history were only a record of victories, Cleopatra would occupy a footnote, a defeated queen in the shadow of Augustus. But history is not built from victory alone. It is built from moments when individuals confront forces larger than themselves and leave an imprint despite the outcome. Cleopatra's imprint lies not only in what she achieved, but in what she represented. She represented the last sovereign breath of a civilization that had already endured 3,000 years. The pyramids were ancient before Rome was founded. The rituals she performed in temple courts were older than the Latin language. When she stood carved in relief beside the gods at Dendera, she was not inventing tradition. She was stepping into an unbroken chain of sacred kingship. And yet she was also modern in a way that feels striking even now. She understood media before media existed. She curated image. She deployed spectacle strategically. She grasped that perception shapes power. Her entrance to meet Antony was diplomacy staged as theatre. Her appearance as Isis was theology serving governance. Even her death was an act of narrative control. Rome's leaders understood this as well. Augustus carefully framed Actium not as civil war, but as foreign threat defeated. He positioned Cleopatra as antagonist to unify Roman identity. In doing so, he inadvertently ensured that her name would be repeated alongside his own for centuries. There is something paradoxical here. The empire that absorbed her kingdom also preserved her memory. Without Roman writers, much of her story would be lost. Without Roman victory, she might have faded like many other Hellenistic monarchs. Instead, she became a necessary counterpoint in the story of Rome's transformation. Yet Cleopatra's endurance goes beyond Roman literature. She persists because she embodies tension between intellect and emotion, sovereignty and vulnerability, triumph and tragedy. She was not invincible. She made choices that failed. She wagered on Antony and lost. She misjudged Octavian's patience. She underestimated the power of Roman propaganda. But she also ruled longer than many of her contemporaries in a violently unstable era. She stabilized Egypt's economy during lean floods. She maintained internal administration. She bore heirs not merely as symbols, but as political instruments. She stood as active participant in Mediterranean politics, rather than passive pawn. Her defeat does not negate her capability. In the centuries after her death, Egypt's identity continued evolving. Under Rome, It became breadbasket of empire. Under Byzantine rule, it became center of theological scholarship. Under Arab conquest in the 7th century, it transformed linguistically and culturally once again. Each era layered itself upon the last. And yet, Cleopatra's name remains tethered to the idea of ancient Egypt in the global imagination. For many, she is the final chapter of pharaonic history, the closing line of a narrative that began with Narmer uniting Upper and Lower Egypt thousands of years earlier. There is something almost poetic in that symmetry. The first pharaoh unified lands along the Nile. The last sought to preserve that unity against an expanding Mediterranean superpower. Both stood at thresholds. When we consider Cleopatra now, in the quiet distance of 2 millennia, we do not see only the glittering barge or the asp poised at her skin. We see a ruler navigating complexity. We see a young woman forced into co-rule with a brother husband while factions plotted around her. We see an exile raising an army in Syria. We see a strategist presenting herself before Caesar not as supplicant, but as ally. We see a mother positioning her son as future king. We see a queen attempting to construct an Eastern political balance strong enough to counter Rome. We see a sovereign facing inevitable defeat and choosing dignity over spectacle. The sea that once carried her ships still moves against the coast of Alexandria. The Pharos lighthouse has long since fallen, yet its memory survives in descriptions of its flame-guiding sailors at night. In many ways, Cleopatra herself is like that lighthouse. The structure is gone. The stones lie scattered beneath water. But the idea of the light, the image of it cutting through darkness, persists. Her story illuminates the fragile space between autonomy and empire. It reminds us that power is never static, that cultures merge and dissolve, that individuals can shape history even when they cannot control its outcome. We stand now at the edge of her narrative. One final chapter remains, not of events, but of reflection, a closing that gathers the threads of Nile and Rome, temple and palace, strategy and surrender. We will move there gently. For now, let the image settle. Alexandria at twilight, the harbour dim, the palace quiet, the last pharaoh of Egypt, watching a horizon she knows is changing, and knowing that history, though relentless, will remember her name. Night settles softly over Alexandria. The harbour is no longer crowded with triremes bearing Roman insignia or royal standards snapping in the wind. The palace quarter that once shimmered with torchlight and silk banners lies fragmented beneath centuries of tide and stone. The Pharos lighthouse, that ancient flame guiding ships safely to shore, has long since fallen to earthquake and time. And yet, if one closes the eyes and listens carefully, it is still possible to imagine the rhythm of Cleopatra's world. The slow pulse of the Nile as it moves northward, steady and indifferent. The murmur of multilingual voices in marble corridors. The scratch of reed pens across papyrus. The low chant of priests beneath painted ceilings where gods gaze down in silence. Cleopatra's story does not end in spectacle. It dissolves into continuity. After her death, Rome did not destroy Egypt. It absorbed it. Grain still flowed. Farmers still watched the flood. Markets still opened at dawn. Life, as it always does, moved forward. Empires are vast, but they are not eternal. The Roman Empire that conquered Egypt would itself fracture centuries later. Its western half would fall. Its eastern half would transform. Languages would evolve. Religions would shift. Borders would blur. and still, the Nile would rise and fall. Cleopatra stands at a unique convergence in that long unfolding, the final sovereign of a kingdom that had already survived unimaginable stretches of time. When she walked through temple courts, carved with hieroglyphs older than Rome, she did so as living link in a chain stretching back 3 millennia. The rituals she performed were echoes of ancient voices. The crown she wore bore symbols shaped in an age when bronze was new. She carried the weight of that continuity into a world increasingly dominated by Roman legions and senatorial decrees. In the end, Rome prevailed militarily, but Cleopatra prevailed in memory. Augustus built monuments of stone to celebrate Actium. He reshaped governance and ushered in the Pax Romana. His legacy altered the structure of Western civilization. Yet Cleopatra's name travels alongside his, spoken with curiosity, fascination, and debate. She has become something larger than the outcome of a war. She represents resistance to erasure. She represents the human effort to stand upright when the tide turns against you. She represents the attempt to hold identity intact amid overwhelming change. For centuries, storytellers have returned to her because she refuses to flatten into a single dimension. Was she manipulative? Strategic leaders often are. Was she ambitious? Sovereigns must be. Was she theatrical? In politics, performance is power. Was she flawed? Inevitably. Her humanity is what keeps her luminous. Imagine her in the final quiet hours before dawn on that last day in August of 30 BCE. The air in Alexandria heavy with heat, the city restless beneath Roman occupation. Within the mausoleum, gold and scrolls stacked beside stone walls. She knows the world she fought to preserve is ending. But even in that narrowing space, she chooses the manner of her departure. Not dragged through foreign streets, not reduced to trophy, but seated, adorned, sovereign to the last breath. That image, whether exact in detail or softened by retelling, carries meaning beyond the literal. It tells us that while history can conquer territory, it cannot fully command dignity. Cleopatra's reign lasted just over 2 decades. Egypt's pharaonic tradition lasted over 3,000 years. Rome's empire lasted centuries. And now all of them lie in the past. What remains are stories, inscriptions, fragments of marble, coins stamped with faces long turned to dust. And among those fragments, Cleopatra's presence remains distinct. She's not remembered solely because she loved Caesar and Antony. She is remembered because she stood at the hinge of an age and met it with intelligence, adaptability, and resolve. She ruled when ruling was dangerous. She negotiated when negotiation required nerve. She defied when defiance carried mortal cost. And when choice narrowed to one final act, she chose sovereignty over humiliation. The Nile still moves under moonlight. The desert wind still traces patterns across temple walls, where her name is carved within a royal cartouche. The Mediterranean still touches the shore where her palace once stood. Empires fade into sediment, but certain figures linger, not frozen in marble, but alive in imagination. Cleopatra lingers, not as caricature, not as mere romance, but as the last Pharaoh of Egypt, a queen who lived at the edge of empire and refused to vanish quietly into its shadow. And now, as the night deepens and the ancient world grows still once more, her story settles gently into silence. The river flows, the stars remain. And Cleopatra, luminous at history's turning point, drifts into memory, enduring, enigmatic, unforgettable. And so we let the torches of Alexandria dim. The palace grows quiet. The harbour settles into a slow rhythm beneath the stars. The great lighthouse that once burned against the night exists now only in memory, its flame carried forward in words instead of fire. Cleopatra's world has faded into sand and sea. The marble halls are gone. The banners have fallen. The voices that once debated power in candlelit chambers have long since dissolved into silence. Rome has risen and fallen. Empires have come and gone like tides, but the Nile still flows. It moves as it did when she was born. It moves as it did when she ruled. It moves as it did when she chose her final moment. Steady, unhurried, eternal in its rhythm. Cleopatra's life was not a fairy tale, nor merely a tragedy. It was a human life lived at the edge of enormous change. She stood between worlds, between ancient gods and rising empire, between tradition and transformation, and for as long as she could, she held her ground. And now, centuries later, her story softens into something quieter. Not spectacle, not propaganda, but memory. A young queen learning languages by lamplight, a ruler watching the Nile's flood with careful concern, a strategist weighing letters from Rome, a woman standing at the threshold of history, choosing dignity when choice was nearly gone. The night deepens over Alexandria. The sea breathes against the shore. The desert wind moves gently across carved stone where her name still rests inside its royal frame. And as the ancient world drifts farther away, Cleopatra remains. Not loud, not blazing, but steady, like a distant star that continues to shine long after its light first began its journey. Now let the past grow still. Let the river carry the story onward, and let yourself drift, slowly, peacefully, into rest.